the threat or the danger that is associated with money are going to be very similar to your responses, regardless of how much money is in my bank account or is in your bank account.
Thank you for that. A follow up question that I have for you is: does financial trauma ever go away? Is there a cure for it? Should we even consider it like to be something that we can all just free ourselves from?
Great questions. I think yes, it is something that we certainly should consider freeing ourselves from. Is there a cure for it? I don't think that there's necessarily a cure, right? So, going into trauma research, trauma, generalized trauma, rewires your brain, right? You experience this experience, and that experience looks different for every person.
Hello, welcome back to the show. I am beyond, like, I'm gonna put the carpet out right now because I need to roll it for our guest today. My friend, we have been way overdue. How are you today?
Way overdue. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here. I know so much about you and the work that you do, but for the listeners, I would like for you to do an introduction so they get to know you, because I want them to just stop whatever they're doing, grab their little popcorn or palomitas, as I like to call them, which is the same, and just sit down for this conversation.
Sure. So, my name is Rahkim Sabree. I am a financial therapist who specializes in the area of financial trauma. I'm also an author of the recently published book, Overcoming Financial Trauma by Wiley. I'm a keynote speaker. I have a banking background, so many things, so many things. But my message, as I've been sharing it, is really around socializing this idea of financial trauma and expanding the view that we look at it through. So, not just some pathology that's locked up in the mental health field, but something that really impacts all of us. And so I hope that our conversation today gets to shine a little bit more light on financial trauma, at least in the way that I discuss it. And looking forward to sharing more about me through the questions that you ask.
Yes, absolutely. I want to say that when I was just looking online for what it meant to experience financial trauma, there were very few people talking about it. And I mean, there was another layer to it, and that was there were very few men that were actually talking about this topic. I feel like everyone else was saying, just go ahead and invest in the S&P 500, and here's the index fund. But you decided to take a different route. And for that, I was like, I need to follow this person. I need to get to know this person, because you saw something that most people didn't see. And as you mentioned with your banking background, there was a gap. But what inspired you to start posting on social media and start saying, hey, listen, there is something that we haven't spoken about, and I am here to educate you and your employer and everybody else that will listen?
Yeah, so it's been a graduated journey. When I first left the bank, I thought that I was going to open up this one on one financial coaching practice. And I learned immediately that I needed to niche down. So the question that I asked myself was, what makes what I do different, right? If there are 100 online coaches, how do I stand out from the pack? And so at first I thought it was chasing credentials. And chase credentials I did, right? I got the certified financial education instructor. I got the registered financial consultant. I went and then got the accredited financial counseling designation. I started the process for the certified financial therapist designation. I'm like, I need to get all of these credentials so that people take me seriously and that I'm not just an influencer online talking about money. But in the process of niching down and specializing, the area of coaching that I specifically wanted to get into was mindset coaching related to money. So I saw, to your point, in the banking world, that there were a ton of people who maybe knew what they should be doing, right? They knew what a budget was, they knew how to use credit cards, they knew to have different accounts and separate their money, but they would fall into these behaviors that I didn't have the vocabulary to describe quite yet. And so, in working with people who were struggling with setting up a budget, for example, I realized that it wasn't just the math, there was more. And so, like, that thread there that was kind of like frayed, I started to pull on and went down a rabbit hole, discovered financial psychology, discovered financial therapy and the Financial Therapy Association. And on my second book, Financially Irresponsible, I was reading a book by Dr. Joy DeGroy where she talks about racialized trauma through an intergenerational transfer of trauma lens. And so I know that was a mouthful, but this idea of intergenerational transfer of trauma was so fascinating to me because she uses it as a basis to describe behavior as a whole, right? Some of the attitudes and the beliefs that specifically Black Americans carry in engaging with the workplace and engaging with society and engaging with their children. And so I bookmarked that in my mind to come back to in thinking that if intergenerational trauma can be transferred through a lens of racialized trauma, then why can't these attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors around money also not be transferred intergenerationally? And so I kind of mashed up the words generational trauma with finances and landed on financial trauma mistakenly. And I laugh at this every time I say it, thinking that I created the phrase financial trauma. And so as you were introducing me and you're talking about how few people were discussing financial trauma, and more than that, how few men were discussing financial trauma, I like a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, you know what? I don't know too many other men who talk about financial trauma. That is some rare air. And then, certainly some of my colleagues in the space who talk about financial trauma. Chantel Chapman, who I know well, went through her program, The Trauma of Money. Chloe McKenzie, who's done research with NIFI. I haven't had the pleasure of interacting with her, but I know that she's done research through a Black feminist lens. I think being able to talk about financial trauma, certainly through the lens of my experience as a Black man and a millennial, is super unique and super important. In some instances, I receive resistance. In other instances, I receive, open arms from people who are interested in learning more. But as I shared, it's been a graduated experience. So I moved from this idea of financial coaching into this financial therapy world and really pull on what it is that I've learned about financial counseling, my banking background, my own personal experiences to guide the conversations that I have with people. But more than that, to guide the way that I create content specifically around educating the people who end up helping the people, right? So a lot of the work that I do is train the trainer work or creating frameworks that I can socialize, to your point, with organizations who have employees that are experiencing high levels of financial stress.
So many nuggets. I'm like, which one do I pick? Because I was writing things as you were speaking. First of all, I want to say that the fact that you went through the path of credentials and then just recognizing that, wait a minute, like, where am I going with this? That is very, very true for our community. As high achieving Latinas, we seek the credentials, we want to do things right. And I think that that works for your case in this book and in this path that you have taken, because you realize that a lot of the times you also have the live experiences that cannot be taught. There isn't a framework that will tell you this is how you get from A to B and so on. And I want to touch on that because you also talk about how some people that you maybe want to approach have this resistance to the topic over the way we talk about finances, because finances is a regulated industry. So, I mean, same like therapy, right? And so here you come, not trying to combine both of them. And I want to talk about another thing that you said. So, on that note, I just let me stop because I'm like, I need to jump to these questions right now. How does someone that is combining two things really approaches that conversation? Because not everyone is willing to listen. In fact, I will say that a lot of people, a lot of employers also look the other way because it is an uncomfortable topic for a lot of people.
For sure. Definitely a tough situation to be in, right? I think that my first piece of advice would be to talk to the people who are interested in listening. A lot of the confidence, if we can call it that, that I have gained over the years in discussing this topic as a legitimate topic, right? Because some people would not consider financial trauma or financial therapy for that matter as a legitimate. Started in small pockets of the financial education or I hate to use this phrase, but like financial influencing community. sometimes things just make sense. And when we approach these very heavy topics through these siloed lenses, right? We're looking at finances, we're looking at mental health, and they are often locked behind the walls of academia or some kind of credential. People are experiencing the hurt, but they don't have the language to describe it, and they don't feel like they have the permission to approach like what does medicine look like or feel like outside of the lens of what is considered quote unquote traditional. So I started having conversations within pockets of people who were open to hearing it. In the earlier days of me discussing and socializing financial trauma, that looked like the FinCon community. So that was some of the first times that I would go out and talk about financial trauma in front of a group. That population was largely other content creators who were looking for ways to either grow their business or monetize their business. And I realized very quickly in my first session discussing financial trauma that it was something that touched a lot of people's hearts. There were tears, there were laughs. At the end of the session, so many people came up to me to tell me, like, wow, I've never heard of this before, but this was super impactful. And so that gave me a little bit more fire. Shortly after that, I attended my first Financial Therapy Association conference, and I wasn't affiliated with the organization at the time, but I did a presentation again on financial trauma and same kind of response. And I was like, okay, like these people are, you know, carrying doctorate's degrees, they're licensed mental health counselors or clinical social workers or researchers, and these people are paying attention to me. They're telling me that my message matters. I'm on to something here. And so there was a little bit of validation that came with getting the buy in from this group. And I just kept seeding this information, talking about it, talking about it, talking about it. And I'll never forget another creator and I had a meeting, ironically, about writing a book with a publisher. And I was asking for advice because at that point I had previously self published two books. And they're like, listen, you need to focus on making your name synonymous with the phrase financial trauma. Like you need to do so much work that when people hear that phrase, they instantly think about you. And I took that advice to heart. Everything from that moment forward was a discussion around a discussion of financial trauma and how do I connect events in pop culture to financial trauma? How do I don't want to say dilute, but how do I break it down on an elementary level so that the average everyday person can understand what it is that I'm communicating? And so some of what it is that I did outside of socializing it verbally was start a newsletter on Substack where I would just write my thoughts, right? And so there's nobody that tells me I can't say or I can't communicate. The Substack became wildly popular. People started subscribing, people started sharing, people started looking forward to it. I got feedback. It later went on to earn two Plutus Awards and then an award from the AFCPE for outstanding consumer financial information. So in the journey of like pushing uphill, right? If you can use an analogy, pushing a stone uphill, there were definitely different points where I got validation that gave me more energy to keep going. And it happened exactly the way that that creator had informed me, right? I got an opportunity to talk with a publisher and they're like, so what do you want? Like, what is your thing? Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, financial trauma. And they're like, let's do this. Now I have a book on financial trauma.
And I love that so much for you, for your community, for my community, because I also got the book. I was like, I want to learn from people that come from similar backgrounds like me. And I think that's also a big differentiator about the work that you do, that is not just academic research, it's also, again, the live experience that brings a personalized storytelling of, hey, I'm not different. On that note, I want to ask you, because I believe there is a lot of misinterpretation about who has financial trauma, because a lot of times people think, well, it's only underrepresented or undereducated. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I love this question because it's a myth that I like constantly have to go out and myth bust, right? I believe that everybody, especially operating within the system of capitalism, can and likely will experience financial trauma. And so this is true sometimes to a greater degree of the individuals who are high income, high net worth. To your point, when we hear that phrase financial trauma, we often look at it through the lens of somebody who's experiencing financial hardship, somebody who's struggling, somebody who's been marginalized. We don't look at it through the lens of individuals who have quote unquote made it and what are the motivations that got them to the point of quote unquote making it, right? Could it be that the reason why they're wildly successful financially is in a reaction to previous financial trauma that they either experienced or that other people in their close quarters experienced? And so I say, I define financial trauma in this way. I think this will be helpful. Any instance observed or experienced that has a negative impact on the way someone views, interacts with, or believes about money. And so that experience or observed piece is important because much of our financial socialization from a very young age tells us that if you don't have money, you're not valuable, right? If you don't have money, you don't deserve respect. If you don't have money, you're vulnerable. And unfortunately, in many cases, this is true. If you don't have money, you are vulnerable. Money provides safety in many instances. But, and I share this so intimately, and I think it's super important. Many times when I work with people one on one, through a financial therapy lens addressing financial trauma, one of the first questions that I ask them is, what does money represent to you? And I usually get one of three answers. Money represents power, money represents security, or money represents freedom, right? And so people are out pursuing one of those three things. And depending on how they answer the question to me, it lets me know how do I approach them in responding to what it is that they are responding to through a financial trauma lens. So, could Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, be experiencing financial trauma? Absolutely, right? Could any of the NBA basketball players with multi-million-dollar a year contracts be experiencing financial trauma? Absolutely. They likely are experiencing financial trauma. And so that expanded definition, and we can get into kind of the weeds of like the different sources of financial trauma that I identify, but that expanded definition allows for the pool to be much greater. And you hit the nail on the head earlier when you said that I'm paraphrasing, by demonstrating and showcasing this work, that it shows that I may be unique in my expression as a human being, but like I'm not so different from you, right? My responses to the threat or the danger that is associated with money are going to be very similar to your responses, regardless of how much money is in my bank account or is in your bank account.
Thank you for that. A follow up question that I have for you is, does financial trauma ever go away? Is there a cure for it? Should we even use the word, or should we even consider it like to be something that we can all just free ourselves from?
Great questions. I think yes, it is something that we certainly should consider freeing ourselves from. Is there a cure for it? I don't think that there's necessarily a cure, right? So going into trauma research, generalized trauma, rewires your brain, right? You experience this experience, and that experience looks different for every person. And then your brain says, oh, I didn't like that. So this is how I'm going to protect you in maneuvering moving forward. And so when we start to then characterize money and our experiences with money as harmful in a way that we're not socialized to do, we can then say, oh, money hurt me in this way, or the observation of somebody else being hurt by money influenced me in this way. And so our responses to this hurt is a survival based response, right? We don't want to experience that hurt. So we're going to navigate in the ways that we learn to navigate. Because of the rewiring of your brain as a result of trauma, you don't like take a pill or do an exercise and then your brain goes back to the way that it was before, right? And so I think the same thing is true when we're discussing financial trauma, right? Your brain has shifted. Now you can engage in activities or exercises that help to rewire your brain in alignment with a version of you that you would like to become, excuse me, that you would like to become, or that is more healthy when it comes to interactions with money. One of the things that I find in discussing financial trauma is the idea of awareness around financial trauma is super powerful, because when you can become aware that money is hurting you, or this idea of money is hurting you, you can then become aware of the triggers and the stimuli that make you respond in a way that may result in overspending, that may result in hoarding, that may result in avoidance. right, when it comes to money. And so then you can make more conscious decisions around what those responses look like because you have the ability to slow down and put labels on what it is that you're experiencing. And so I think the healing piece when it comes to financial trauma is not necessarily, like I said, a cure, but it's awareness. It's saying, I know that this is a trigger. I know that my body or my mind and my body are responding in this way. I know that maybe in the way that I respond from a physiological or psychological perspective is not something that I can control, but the behavior that follows is something that I can control, right? I can choose not to overspend. I can choose not to hoard. I can choose not to be avoidant. And of course, that takes work. I think it's going to be a continuous process. And that's part of the reason why a lot of my work, I use that present progressive overcoming financial trauma, right? Rather than overcame financial trauma or overcome financial trauma. Because I'm not making promises that you'll never experience any of these sources of trauma again. But what I am saying is that in having these tools, when you experience this financial trauma again, you'll be more equipped to deal with it because you have an awareness of what's going on.
I love this so much. I can listen to you all day long because I know of the work that you have been doing, and I also know of the passion that you have. I recently learned that the economy and in the economy that we're living displays a lot of Black women out of the workforce. Does that event could kind of make them feel like, oh, now I experienced a situation or a circumstance that could cause financial trauma?
Absolutely. I think that it is very much financially traumatic when we look at the rate of layoffs. And then when we look at what that barrier to re entering the workforce after having the layoff looks like. I have seen over the last 2 years specifically people on LinkedIn posting every single day, like, I'm running out of money. I need a job. I'm willing to do anything, right? Or I've put in hundreds of applications and I can't get past the interview phase. Or I've had interviews and I've been ghosted, right? And so these are traumatic experiences, right? There's an increase in financial stress. There's certainly financial implications if you don't have cash reserves that you're sitting on. People are going into debt or going deeper into debt. Maybe they're tapping out their emergency fund. Maybe they're tapping out their retirement accounts. And so the reaction is, again, a survival based reaction to what's happening in the job market and the economy. I've hinted at the 6 sources of financial trauma. I just want to run through them and point to one specifically. So when I talk about financial trauma, I talk about it through the lens of 6 sources. The first is generational or genetic, the second is vicarious or observational, the third is financial hardship or poverty, the fourth is workplace or employment. The fifth is systemic or institutional. And the sixth is family, society, or religious. So, your question, as it relates to the layoff of women in particular, would fall, I think, into 2 categories. It will fall into the workplace and employment category, where we see a lot of fawning behaviors show up, or financial fawning, which is a phrase that was coined by Chantel Chapman, where people are engaged in these practices of people pleasing so that they can get the job, right? I am going to do whatever it is that I can to get this job. I'm going to change the way I look. I'm going to change the way I sound. I'm going to deal with conditions that I would not otherwise deal with. And then when I get the job, I'm going to work so hard to make sure that I am noticed, to make sure that I don't create waves, to make sure that I keep the job. And so if I get passed over for the promotion, I'm just going to deal with that. If I hold on to this idea that I have to work twice as hard to get just as far as like mediocre Mike, who's a white guy and who just had the job, cool. And so when we see these behaviors play out, sometimes it's referred to as code switching, right? When we see these behaviors play out, we often don't associate it with a survival based response to a form of economic warfare where it's like, I need money to survive, so I'm going to do what I can, even if that means becoming other than myself or untrue to who it is that I am outside of the workplace so that I can get the bag. The second of those 6 sources that I think it falls into is definitely institutional and systemic. I do not believe that in what is considered one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest nation in the world, that people can't get paid a living wage. right? And so this idea of manufactured, not really an idea, right? This experience of manufactured scarcity in the way that some of the CEOs of some of these companies are making massive amounts in their salary, and they're people who are homeless or people who are hungry, who don't have food. And especially with what we're seeing with AI coming in and changing and redefining what the workforce is looking like today and what it will look like over the next, very rapidly 5 to 10 years, it's creating a greater gap in terms of who can work, how much they can get paid, and as a result, how they're able to care for themselves. That's institutional, that's systemic, that's by design, that can be changed, right? By the people who are in power. But the people who are in power don't want to give up power to make that happen. And so when we're talking about financial trauma in the grand scheme of things, I talk about it from this lens of personal agency as far as what is it that you can do, that you can control to influence your relationship with money. But I also talk about it through a systemic and institutional lens that says these are the things that we don't have direct control over that are not our faults. And I think that that's super important because many of the conversations that are had around money, particularly by men, use blame, shame, and guilt that says there's something wrong with you, you're not smart enough, you're not working hard enough, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And as a result, you deserve the position that you're in. And so many people carry that, especially when it comes to navigating debt, when it comes to navigating income, when it comes to making decisions that are quote unquote the right thing. So we talk about that with the credentials, right? There are all these goalposts that were set up for us that we have to kind of navigate, or that we feel like we have to navigate in order to be successful. And then when we navigate it, like once it's behind us, we realize, wait a second, like why am I here? And I think that that feeling is the most prevalent right now with individuals who went and took a whole bunch of student loan debt out because we were told this story that, hey, if you get the higher education, you're going to get the high salary, you're going to be able to take care of your family. And then people go and they get these one, two, and you talk about black women being this population that's being laid off, but black women are some of the most, in many instances, overeducated population by way of credential. Black women keep going back to school to get these degrees and find themselves with all of this debt, not being able to enter the workforce. And so it's a really vicious cycle, but I think that what maybe some of your listeners, and certainly in the conversations that I have, can socialize and help people to feel better about is you didn't do anything wrong, right? Like it's not your fault. This is the way that the system is working. And unfortunately, you were not prioritized in the grand scheme of things to be successful.
Percent. And I think that if we can learn how to create the awareness around financial trauma and integrate some of the educational things about investing, because I this is why I invest, this is why I love talking about investing, because we have started so far. I mean, we were not even at the starting line when we started talking about, how can we build wealth. And I love that you touch on the educational component, because that is very true also in the Latino community. We go back to school because we believe that another degree is going to help us get ahead. And I am a believer of education. Like I read books, I do things. I don't do it anymore for the credentials, but just so I don't get behind again, right? Like I don't post, oh, I got accredited on this on LinkedIn anymore, because I'm like, I don't want to play the game. But you just give us so much that I feel like I just need to pause and like breathe and release, because I know my listener, and for those of you that watch us on YouTube, you're probably feeling like, wow, this is heavy, and it is a heavy topic, but it's also a topic that we need to become aware of. So I want to switch the conversation about what is your happiest money memory?
Ooh, this is a good question. My happiest money memory, huh? I think one of my happiest. This is it's funny. It's like insignificant, but significant in a way. My happiest money memory. There's two that come to mind. I was still working in banking, and I needed a new car. So my first car was a happy money memory, but I had bought it from a friend, like secondhand. It was an old beater car, but it was my first car. I paid cash for it. I think like $1,800. And so I was happy, of course, because now I had wheels. I felt like an adult. I think I was like 22 years old. But my after my car went, that car went, I went to a dealership and I was working in the bank. So I knew how this worked already. I got a pre approval, I had a pre approval letter in my pocket. I had cash in my pocket. I'm having the conversation, but I was dressed down, right? And so like I grew up in New York and I had like the quote unquote New York uniform on, right? I had Timberland boots on, jeans. I think I had like a sweater vest and I had a New York fitted hat on. And so I go in and I'm talking to the manager of the sales team of this dealership about buying a car, and it was a Honda Accord. I believe that it was a stick shift, and it was just perfect. It was like everything that I wanted. And the guy's like not really taking me seriously. He's like being very condescending in his language. He's telling me what his deal is, which was like outrageous. And I finally say to him, I said, "Listen, I know that I'm going to get approved for this because I have a pre-approval letter in my pocket with cash. But based off of the way that he was treating me, I was like, I don't want to do business with you." And I walked out. The guy like was chasing me out of the dealership. He called me nonstop. I kid you not, every single day for like 2 weeks, trying to get me to come back to buy this car. And I was just like, in that moment, I think I felt powerful. And there were several car related experiences where I'm like, yeah, like I've arrived. The second one was I had just bought my house. And when you first asked the question, my first thought was to say buying my house, but like that's a different conversation. I had just bought my house. I closed, so I was 26 years old. And I'm like, I have this two family, three bedroom, one bathroom on each unit, 1,200 square feet per unit. So 2,400 square feet in total property that is mine. Like this is all mine. And I went in there and I bought a mattress. Like I bought a bed. So it's like the mattress and the box frame, and I'm like sleeping on the floor, but just so happy that this is my place. And I go to a discount furniture store and I'm looking to buy furniture. Like I want to buy a furniture set. And I'm going through looking at different pieces of furniture. I find one that I like. I tell the first off, the salesperson starts following me around the store, right? Go figure. So I tell them that I'm interested. They're like, okay, they bring me up to the front. They're like, we're not going to be able to get this to you for another 2 weeks. We can give it to you in this color or that color. And they're like, are you going to be, I really hate to out the name of the store, but I will. Are you going to be applying for a Bob's credit card? I'm like, no. And they're like, how are you paying? And I was like, American Express. And they're like, you have American Express? Suddenly, the service changes drastically. They can get me the furniture a lot quicker. They're like now waiting on me hand and foot. And I'm like, all I had to say was I had American Express, and the whole dynamic of the interaction shifts. And of course, this is, like I said, in my younger years. So I was 26 years old. I was feeling really boastful, really proud. But in that moment, now that I'm like recanting it, I'm not recanting it, but reliving it, I think about the question that I ask people: what does money represent to you? And in both of those moments, I felt powerful, right? Like I was like, these people are treating me poorly because they have this impression of me based off of my appearance. And now they know that I have, and they're treating me so much better. And I don't remember who was with me, but I had somebody with me who was like able to observe this. And it was like, did you see? And I'm like, yeah, like they treated me so differently because I have American Express. Yeah. But it was a happy moment for me because it was the peak of this mountain that I had been working towards climbing
Yes.
from, really childhood. But when I entered the banking industry at 21 years old, we're talking about 5 years of difference from not knowing what credit was or why it was important or even, what my credit score was, to being able to walk into really anywhere that I wanted to and buy anything that I wanted to because I had such great credit.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. The whole time you're talking, I was smiling and I wanted to ask you this question specifically. I don't think I've ever asked this question on the show, by the way. In fact, I am certain that I have never asked, I guess, what is a happy money memory. But I wanted to ask you this because there is also the other side of money, right? Like we can focus on the negative, that the big corporations, the profits, but money can also make us happy when for the purposes that you want. Now, one of the things that we love doing here on the show is to redirect dollars back to our community. And you are my friend, so you're part of my community. So, how can we redirect some dollars back to the work that you do? This is where you put your request for us.
Absolutely, by overcoming financial trauma. And I think that, first of all, I have to say, community is so important, right? I cannot overemphasize the importance of community. In fact, when we talk about financial healing, so you asked this question earlier, is there a cure? If I had to say yes to there being a cure to financial trauma, that cure would be community. So in the book, Overcoming Financial Trauma, towards the end of the book, so I break the book into three different parts. I talk about what it means to have community, right? Community that you chose. So not necessarily the family that you were raised into or the religious group that you're affiliated with, but community that you choose, culture that you create and offer, and how you use that to build community of like-minded people who are working towards kind of the greater good that you guys all get to construct. But the building of community is very healing, not just from like, this is a nice to have financial statement, but physiologically, human beings are wired to be in community. We're not wired to be alone. We're wired to seek safety in one another. And so when we use communal based practices, particularly communal based economic practices, we can, I'm not going to say completely undo, but we can work to heal from the impact of navigating capitalism as a system, right? Because capitalism isolates. And I talk about that in the book a lot too. Capitalism places the priority on the individual. I need to get mine, right? Before anybody else. I need to have my own before anybody else. And I know that the Black and the Latino communities have a lot in common. I grew up around Latino people. I have great love for Latino people. In fact, I dance a little bachata. I speak a little
Stop
Spanish.
it.
I'm so serious.
I'm like, stop it. Now I might stop the recording now because this is good.
I I learned to speak Spanish. I don't speak Portuguese, but I can understand Portuguese because of my Spanish and because I grew up. My best friend, who like literally lived across the street from me, was Brazilian. His family's Brazilian. His parents refer to me as son. I refer to his parents as my Brazilian parents. And then my best friend here in Connecticut is Dominican, and his parents the same. His family the same. His grandfather speaks no English. Every single time I go over there, he's very happy to see me and embrace me. So I know of the cultural nuances that exist within the Latino community, and I know that, like the Black community, that Latino people are very communal by nature, right? Like
Yes,
these are practices that are inherent to the culture, and where there's a fracture, and I don't know if this is something that you have discussed. I'm sure that it is, where there's a fracture in the assimilation into American culture is that there is a departure from that communal collectivist practice and the embracing of it has to be about me.
yes,
And so when you see across generations, particularly with first gen people from other countries who come here from a communal based family or culture, and they're having to navigate the world of, do I buy the Tesla? Do I get the high rise apartment? I have the six-figure salary. What do I do with this money? Do I show it or do I give it back to my community? That is a tough space for first generation people to exist in. And so I address that as well in the book.
I
So
love
to
that.
answer your question, after I've given all of that,
No, I'm like, is he gonna give us the link or what? But I love that I learn about your bachata moves. I love that I learn more about your community. But please do tell us. We're gonna put it in the link in the show notes. But I also want you to verbally say it because this is part of your brand, and I want to thank you for coming to the show. You personally, my observation, you did not just talk about financial trauma. You also give us a master class on personal branding for others. So share the link.
Yeah, so my book is called Overcoming Financial Trauma. It is available anywhere books are sold. If you don't want to support Jeff Bezos and Amazon, definitely go to bookshop.org and support your favorite independent, Latino owned, Black owned, minority owned bookstore. If you are erring on the side of convenience, you can go into barnesandnoble.com. Literally anywhere books are sold, you can ask for it. You can also go to overcomingfinancialtrauma.com and it takes you to a page on my website that has all of those links. But yes, I think that, in investing in me, you're also investing in you and your community because the resources that are present in that book are super powerful. And I'm not just saying that because I wrote it.
I will give you like, well, I have the book already, by the way. I still have to write a review, but I love that you have a book. I love that it came from you. I love that you share your live experiences. And I really love that thought leadership that went into all of this work. So I want to give you your flowers, tus flores, like we say. And I cannot wait to meet you in person because I will dance bachata with you when I see you. So
Oh
thank
yeah,
you.
let's do it.